What up, everyone, and welcome back to the Real Estate Unlocked podcast. I am your host, Joseph Marone, and today we're going to be covering a highly requested topic in real estate. One would even argue a better option than your traditional rental, a strategic way to sell your property at a higher purchase price. Today, we're going to be covering the topic of lease options. A lease option is an agreement that gives the renter a choice to purchase the rented property during or at the end of the rental period. It also precludes the owner from offering the property for sale to anyone else, which is a huge benefit for the renter if they are looking to purchase a home but need a little time to rebuild their credit. This agreement usually requires the renter to pay an upfront fee for the right to purchase the property at a later date. It's a huge benefit for both parties, and if utilized properly, it can open up a lot more doors for your real estate business. Now, if that sounds appealing to you, this episode will cover everything you need to know about lease options, how to structure one yourself, and how you can start utilizing this creative strategy today. Now, you know how we do it on the Real Estate Unlocked podcast. If we're gonna do it, we gotta do it right. We can't just bring on anyone to speak about lease options. We got to bring on the one who's killing it in lease options. Today, our special guest on the podcast is Tim Yu. Tim's real estate journey began in 2022 with his first project being a fix and flip. He's also a full-time Army officer located in Louisville, Kentucky. Over the last year alone, he's managed to purchase 9 buy and hold properties utilizing the power of creative finance. He's also an active member in the Sub-2 community with Pace Morby, and today he's going to share with us one of his favorite ways to grab rentals, the lease option. So without further ado, I've been talking long enough. Everyone, if you will, please allow me to formally introduce to you Tim Yu. Tim, what up, brother? How's your day going?
Yo, what's up, bro? It's going great, man. Dude, that was probably one of the most killer intros I've ever heard on a podcast, man. So I appreciate it, brother. Thank
I
you for having me
appreciate you,
on.
man. Yeah, I've been having a lot of fun with these intros. I've been getting a lot of good feedback, so having fun with it, man. And I appreciate the kind gesture.
Yes, sir. Well, I appreciate you inviting me on the show, man, and I'm excited to talk some real estate, brother.
Hey, I'm excited too, man. Awesome. Well, Tim, welcome to the podcast. First things first, thank you for your service, brother. It's always an honor to have a veteran on the show, so thank you for everything you do for our country, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to help us break down such an amazing strategy to know in real estate. As you already know, with creative finance, the opportunities are limitless. Lease options are just another tool to have in your investing arsenal. Not only can you make a ton of money doing it, but you're also helping out people along the way who may not be able to qualify for a mortgage right now, which makes it a win-win for both parties. And I'm pumped that we get to break this topic down together. So thank you.
Yeah, man. Dude, ask away. Like I love to talk about it. And it's kind of what you already talked about in the intro, right? The lease option is so great for the tenant buyer, the person that's actually renting the property and owning the property. So I'm sure we'll talk about it more in depth, but I freaking love this way to structure deals, man. It's absolutely incredible.
I love it too, man. So Tim, you ready to drop some gems?
Let's do it.
All right, let's get into it. So before we really dissect this topic, I'd like to talk about you and your journey for a second. You've been getting a lot of spotlight lately. I see you doing your thing on Pace Morby's Get Creative podcast. I also saw you on Pace's YouTube live breaking down a deal you did where the wholesaler started ghosting the seller. But Tim, how did you start your journey, man? What made you want to get into real estate, and what are you currently focusing on in your business?
Yeah, it's I get this question a lot. It's been a crazy 15-ish months, but I'm an Army officer down in Kentucky, and I used to commute to Fort Knox every day. So that's about a 50-minute commute each way. And, the corny stuff like, you listen to all the podcasts, Bigger Pockets, Get Creative, all that stuff kind of got me like wanting to get started in real estate. And listen to the podcast for about a year until I decided, hey, I need to get started in real estate and like let's go try to do something. So I linked up with a real estate agent and I was on Zillow every single day, just creeping on deals. And I saw a house that was listed for 100 grand and it dropped to 50 grand overnight. So we went to
Wow.
go see that property immediately. And it was boarded up, had a squatter in there and all that. And the owner was from LA. So I know you're from California. So it's kind of
Yep.
funny that these guys are buying up properties in the Midwest. So he didn't want to deal with it anymore. It was beat up. So I bought it for 40 grand cash. Like, so I used the hard money and all that stuff. And, people have heard me talk before. It was not a good deal. So I think I made 5 grand in 6 months. So you would imagine how much work and pain that was, and so after all that stuff, we made that $5,000 and I was about to quit real estate. So I was like, man, I'm done with this stuff. This was not worth it. I ran into a sub two student at a sub two meetup. And that's kind of like how I got started in that stuff, where I met somebody that I trusted and I ended up dumping all my flip money into that mentorship. And then that really, all the stuff I learned in there kind of like scaled my portfolio from there.
Dude, that's interesting. Well, first off, you said, I'm from Southern California, right? So a lot of us investors, we don't buy in California. Not to say that all investors don't buy in California, but the house pricing here is like through the roof, right? So a lot of times we find ourselves buying out of market, in other markets like Texas, Midwest states. But it's interesting the fact that that was 100K and they brought it down to 50K. What was the reason for that?
So there was a squatter that actually broke into the house.
Oh,
And, when you walked in that house, dude, it was like you saw the sketchiest stuff in there. You know what I mean? Like some paraphernalia that you don't want in a house, right? So it's like the owner was just like, hey man, I'm out on the West Coast. It doesn't make that much money. It's
mhm.
set $600 a month in rent. And for me, I thought it was a great cosmetic flip and the risk was really low. So I said, you know what, let's try it. But I made
Yeah.
all the typical mistakes, like bad contractors and all that stuff. So
Yeah, sometimes I see some of these pictures, right, from like some of these houses, and I'm like, dude, it looks like something out of a horror movie. It's crazy, and then but yeah, I really love the fact that you talked about how, hey, I only made 5,000 on this for 6 months, and a lot of people would give up, right? And you said it yourself, you wanted to give up, but you kept pushing forward. And that's great, man, because we got to fail forward. We're gonna make mistakes along the way, but the key is to kind of learn from those mistakes and keep pushing forward, right? So
absolutely.
yeah, great stuff, man. Great stuff. So let's give the people what they came here to see, shall we? What exactly is a lease option and how does it differ from traditional property buying or renting?
Yeah. So lease option is kind of exactly how it sounds. It's a lease. So someone's actually going to rent the property from you. And then the option. So they have the option to purchase the property from now to a set amount of time. Right. So, and the difference between that is, let's say, when you buy a house traditionally, you're getting a mortgage or you're doing creative finance, you're buying the property, you get the deed. The person who's renting from you as a lease option tenant buyer, they don't get the deed until they qualify for an actual mortgage down the road and then pay you off. And then it'll be a normal transaction from there. So, how I explain things the easiest way is they're essentially renting from you. They give you a non refundable down payment. Well,
Hmm,
it's not really a down payment, but it's the non refundable deposit for the option, right? The option fee
right.
that eventually becomes a part of the purchase price, which equivalents to a down payment down the road. And then it becomes a normal traditional sale. Like they qualify with a mortgage lender, and then we go to a closing table, and then they get the deed, and they own the house, and I'm out of it. The great part about it for us as the investor is we're more hands off in terms of maintenance. So it's very state dependent, depending on the rules and the regulations. But for us, everything over $500, I take care of. Everything under $500, the tenant buyer takes care of. So it saves a lot of pain on them calling you for like, leaky toilet or, small maintenance stuff. You just don't have to deal with it because they're okay with taking care of it because they're eventually going to be the property owner. The second thing is obviously the non-refundable down payment. If you're putting 10, 20,000 down, do you think you're going to kick a hole in the property?
Nope.
I don't think so, right? So they're usually going to take care of the property. And also, for every tenant that I put into my homes, I tell them that this is your house, right? This is your house. So, take care of it, do what you want with it. As long as you're building your credit and you're paying your rent, you're good in my books, right?
Awesome. And just to clarify, like you said, it's two separate agreements, correct? It's that's being combined together. So there's the lease agreement and then there's the option to buy agreement.
Yep, absolutely. Two different documents.
Okay, great, man. So can you kind of walk us through the structuring of a lease option agreement? How does that start from A to Z?
Yeah, so I think it's like dealer's choice, right? Like, how long do you want to have that option? How long you want to keep that house kind of locked up, right? Because when you sign a lease option agreement, that option contract prevents you from selling it to anybody else.
Right.
So that's the beauty of it for the buyer as well, because they have that sense of security that from 3 to 5 years, wherever you agree to, that house cannot be sold to anybody else, and I can't change the price. So whatever we set the price to, that's what they're going to pay. So for me, on the investor side, I like to do 3 to 5 years. I allow the seller or the buyer to have 3 to 5 years to buy the house, but to kind of remain in control, to kind of avoid myself from falling into a tough situation, is I have 1 year option contracts. And then if the tenant is performing, paying the rent, actively trying to improve their credit score, I will extend their option for free. Like, there's no fees or anything. I just have that as a controlling mechanism just in case that tenant just goes off the rails and stops participating in the program, right? Because you don't want to trap yourself. Now, I usually like to do a 3 year option. So you set the price. So how I usually do it is I keep things fair, that I add 3% appreciation for every year. So
Mm,
if they're gonna buy, if they tell me, hey, I need 3 years to buy this house, I'll probably add 9 to 10% appreciation on the purchase price on the back end, right?
yeah,
If they don't exercise the option in 3 years, we just have a conversation. We go, hey, are you close? Are you still trying to do this? Are you not? And if they say that they want to do it, then we'll renegotiate a new purchase price.
awesome. Yeah, that's smart that you're factoring in that appreciation for the future, right? So you're factoring that 3% over 3 years if you're doing a 3-year lease.
Yep, yep. Just, we tack on 10% appreciation on the back end, just to, like, essentially with the lease option, essentially you're getting paid three ways. You're getting paid upfront with the down payment,
Hmm.
you're getting cash flow from the rental, and then you're hoping to get paid on the back end with the appreciation you force into the property.
Right. And so at the end of the terms, the buyer still needs to qualify for their own loan, correct?
Yep. So what we like to do, and like, this is what I suggest, so to also protect you as the investor, right? You want to make sure that that tenant is set up for the best way possible to be able to qualify, because you don't want to be predatory. You
Right.
don't want to take a down payment and hope that they're going to not buy the house on the road so you can, like, redo it, right?
Hmm.
So what we like to do is, hey, if you're in our local market in Louisville, which is where I do most of my stuff now, is we actually pair you up with a credit repair person that helps that person plan out their finances and gets their stuff repaired, their credit score. And then we also pair them up with a mortgage lender that I work with for my deals, and also that understands the lease option process, so that they know that that payment that they give me should count as the down payment when they go qualify for that conventional loan.
Yeah, that's awesome, man, because you're not looking at it just as like an investment, right? But you're also looking out for the tenant as well by finding them those available options for them. That's great, man. I love that. So how are you exactly finding these tenants that purchase a property and how are you screening them?
Yeah, so screening's a little different, but I guess we'll start off with how I find them. It's actually as easier than you think it is. So, Facebook Marketplace, and we advertise as a rent to own straight up. and then we also pay for ads. The reason why we pay for ads on Facebook is because there's a lot of bots and spams out there.
Hmm.
And we want to give the tenants or the people looking at the house to realize that we're real, right? Because usually scammers don't pay, $30, $40 on ads. The
Right.
second way is we actually list our properties on all the free property management software, like Avail. Like, have you heard of avail.com?
I have. Yep.
So I actually list all my stuff on there as well and label it as a rent to own. The third and most effective way, I kid you not, dude, is bandit signs.
Bandit
So
signs. Man. Good old bandit
literally
signs.
that orange arrow that says rent to own, and you have a couple of them leading to your house, and right in front of the house is rent to own, call this number. And I probably generate the most leads from the bandit sign, honestly. And you'll get like on Facebook Marketplace, I think I get like 40, 50 people like that message me in like a day. So it's crazy. But how you screen them is complicated because there's so many people. So like for instance, like if you're doing it yourself like I did, I just had a pre-generated message that had
Mhm.
all the instructions. Instead of individually DMing every single person, I just sent them this gigantic paragraph, and that cut out like half the tenants because half the people didn't want to read it. So, right? I was okay with showing the property first and then talking, because in my instructions I said, "Hey, go see the property, and if you like it, then contact me back." Because there's no point of talking for 40 minutes and then they realize when they see the house that they don't want it because they're gonna buy it.
Yep.
So I have one of those like Bluetooth locks, and I literally have like a password that's like available for an hour. So like when they go show or when they go see the house, they have an hour to go see the house, right? So I'm trying to automate everything. Once they tell me that they have, they like the house, they want to move forward, we do the background check. So we don't necessarily care as much about credit. We care about how much money they have because they have to pay rent. And then second, we just want to see if they got some crazy stuff under the hood.
Okay. Got it. So, and I know you said 3 years is what you typically target. Is that like the standard duration for a lease agreement?
I mean, some people do 1 year, some people do 2 year. I just feel like that time frame is too short, right? Because
Oh,
it takes time to build credit, right? Like I think 3 years is a respectable amount of time for someone to actually who's seriously trying to build credit can actually get the job done.
yeah,
Because
because
I think it,
I
yeah,
see some people doing 5 years, and so I didn't know if like 3 years or 5 years, 1 year, like what is that standard duration that people typically use?
yeah. So you're right. People do 5 years, and it really is. I think from the 3 to 5 year time frame is like the standard like industry average right now. Because remember, like after my 3 year mark, I actually negotiate with the tenant to see if they want to stay. Right. And I'll allow them to go even higher than 5, 6 years, right? Just depends on what the conversation is and what their situation is like financially. Um, but really though, when it just comes down to screening is, hey, do they have enough income to pay rent? And do they have enough, so they don't go under, right? Because you don't want them to like not pay rent and then, now I'm evicting them and that's even worse on their credit score and history. We want to make sure that they're good financially. So
Are you opening escrow on lease options, or is it directly between you and the buyer?
So for me, it's between us and the buyer until we go actually qualify for the loan and actually go sell the property. So what we do is we notarize the property, like, or we notarize the option agreement and the lease, and then we have a relationship with the closing attorneys and title companies. So we always close the same one. So when I tell the tenant buyer, like, hey, this is where we're going to close, and they have copies of all the paperwork as well. So it's like, you know, when it's notarized, you have the copy and you know where we're going to close, right? And then also they have the loan officer's information as well that also understands what we're trying to do as well. So it kind of like I can't like scam them, right? Like even if I wanted to, like there's too many people involved and that's how we want it, right? We want tons of third parties to be involved in this situation, in this deal, just to protect myself and protect the buyer, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And so something I want to circle back on. So you said anything that's $500 or below, that the buyer is responsible. Anything above that, you're responsible for, correct?
Correct. So I think that's more personal preference. And
Okay.
also in Kentucky as well. Like, so I would definitely recommend talking to a real estate attorney or a closing attorney in your area, because in Kentucky, if you're having the tenant pay for like a roof repair, like, change out the whole roof, they may or may not have equitable interest in the property.
Mm,
And then if they sued me down the road, like a legality issue, I would probably have to foreclose the person versus just evicting them.
wow.
Right? So you have to be very careful with like the laws. So I would make sure, everything lines up in that way. And then you adjust your lease option like paperwork accordingly to meet those compliance rules and stuff.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on that because every city, every state's going to be different. So if you guys are doing lease options, make sure you look up your specific city or state and look up those county laws to make sure that you're being covered yourself. Great point that you brought that up. And you know what I also like about lease options is like you just mentioned earlier, is like if I rent out to a normal tenant, right, a regular long-term rental, now they're going to be hitting me up for every single repair, right? And I got to pay all these repairs, and it could be big repairs, it could be HVAC, roofing, but a lot of times they could be bugging you at 1 in the morning if you don't have a property manager, blowing you up for a toilet
It's
repair and
for
all
the
this stuff.
birds.
Yeah, and they don't, and not saying all tenants, but necessarily they don't really care, right? Because they're just renting. They're the renter. That's not their property. But with a lease option, they actually plan on buying the property at the end of the term, so they're going to treat it like their own home, which is great, man. That's what I love about this strategy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're giving them the opportunity to be homeowners. And I'll tell you, and I think we kind of talked about this before,
Hmm.
where there was a tenant that I moved in March, right? So, this month, actually, it's March. It was my wife's old house. We got married, so she moved out, and then she heard me about doing all this real estate stuff, and she's like, I don't want to be a landlord. Why don't you lease option it for me? So, and the tenant, when I told the tenant that we were going to take her and let her move in, she literally cried and
That's
said it
awesome.
was always my dream to buy a house, and I was just never in the predicament to do it, right? Or no one ever gave me a chance. So that stuff, if you're a sentimental person like I am, like
Mm,
that's why, like, hey, we get put in these predicaments of real estate investing and all this stuff to affect change, and
right.
I'm literally seeing it like right in front of my face. So absolutely awesome, man. This is like why we're here, right? This is why we
Yeah.
do real estate, man. So it's awesome.
Dude, that's what I love about this business. What I love about creative finance, because a lot of people, a lot of sellers are in bad situations, and we get to come in and be the hero, right? We get to come in and be problem solvers and find solutions for these sellers that the traditional route didn't work for them, right? And we can come in and find these solutions for them and see that happy face at the end of the
Spot on.
day.
Yep.
Dude, it's crazy, man. Yeah, you just gave me chills right now, bro. I love it, man.
Hey,
Glad you brought that up, man.
yes, sir.
So sounds like this strategy has its pros and its cons for both the seller and the buyer. I like to break that down and talk more about, some of that here. So let's start with the seller first. Why would a seller consider offering their property under a lease option instead of just selling it outright? How can a lease option benefit them?
What if I buy a house in like a C-class neighborhood that doesn't really have appreciation, like historically,
Hmm.
right? So there's not a lot of appreciation. It's a cash flow heavy market. And my wife and I don't want to keep this property longer than 5 years. Perfect time for a lease option, right? We buy it creative. So lease options don't work unless like always work. I like lease options because we get creative deals on the contract, and then the tenant buyer can actually fund the entry fee. So that's why I like it on the buy side, right? So as an investor, let's say I'm buying your house, Joseph, right? You ask for 10,000 down, seller finance. I
Hmm.
go get a lease option buyer that's going to give me 12,000 down. I just made $2,000 up front to buy the house,
Right.
right? Now we're cash flowing. I'm not a property manager. It's not a historically cash or appreciative market. So let's go add 10% appreciation on the back end and get that person a home. So everyone's happy, right? I get a cash flowing asset. The tenant buyer buys a house 3 years from now. So that's kind of like my I guess, my take on it from the buyer side.
So for the seller side, I guess another benefit would be you get to sell it at a higher purchase price, right? Because you're factoring in that appreciation. So that's another benefit for the seller, right? Then you're getting your property maintained because now you don't got to worry about some guy just messing up your property because they want to be in it. They're looking at it as a property they want to purchase down the road, right? They're not going to be trashing your property. But
Absolutely.
any
Oh,
other
and you keep the tax depreciation because you're the
oh,
homeowner.
okay. Yeah, that's a good point too, because you still own the property, right? Because right now in the beginning phase, it's just a lease, right? So they don't own the
Correct.
property, you still own the property, so you
Yep.
get all the tax write-offs as well.
Exactly. So that's why I prefer a lease option versus a wrap. And I'm sure, we're in sub two, so everyone loves wraps, right?
Right.
Um, that's one of the positives of a lease option is you keep the deed. You're
Mm,
still the
okay.
homeowner.
Okay, so I know you brought up like the lease option fee in the beginning. So let's talk a little bit more about that lease option fee. So what percentage should a buyer expect to pay, and is that lease option fee refundable at all?
No, so the fee is non-refundable, right? So if they violate an option or if they violate the lease, like they don't pay rent or whatever, they're violating the option contract, right? So the way you structure the option contract is you protect yourself with the lease. So it's like if you violate the lease in any way, you're violating the option contract. If you violate the option contract, your fee is non-refundable. If you don't exercise on the option contract 2 years, 3 years from now, it's non-refundable. If
Mm.
you perform on the option, that money is going to go towards your purchase price.
Awesome. And so how are you determining that percentage? Like, is there like a range that you're shooting for? Is it like,
For me, we try to be as realistic as possible, right? Like it depends on the deal that I'm buying because I try not to go out of pocket when I'm buying a deal. So like if a seller is telling me that I need 20 grand down, that's what I'm going to shoot for at least, right? Because I want to actually break even. Um, we don't want to go over 10, 15% because remember, these people most likely, on average, I'm not saying everybody, is in a predicament where they don't have a lot of money. Or I would just tell them, hey, why don't you pay off your high debt credit cards if you got 30 grand in your bank, right? Like you want them to have money to be able to pay rent and also to fix their credit. So I don't want to like gouge them with a $40,000 down payment. You know what I mean?
yes, because I've seen, I've watched other episodes like where Pace was talking about, he charges like a $7,500, price range or, fee, whatever. And I just figured there's got to be some type of, percentage. Like, is it like 3%, 10%? But yeah, you're making a lot of sense. Like, obviously, you're not going to make it 15, 20% because then it's not going to make sense for them at that point. So,
Correct. On average, I would like if I could get an entry fee super low, 3.5% down. The reason why I picked 3.5% down, it's equivalent to an FHA loan, right? That's like the lowest loan product you can do if you're not a veteran. 3.5% down. It's serious enough money for the tenant to like not destroy your house, and they'll eventually qualify for a loan down the road.
right. And so if the buyer happens to back out and doesn't exercise their option at the end of the terms, you as the seller, you're going to keep that option fee. And then you have the ability at that point to turn around and do it all over again, essentially, correct?
Yep, we clean out the property, we repaint, and then we just re-advertise for another lease option buyer.
Okay. Now, does the buyer have the right to exercise their option before the end of those terms? Like I know you said you do 3 years. Let's say in 1 year, do they have the option to exercise that then?
Absolutely, the sooner the better. Because if we tacked 10% appreciation and they want to go buy the house next year, great, right? Like I'm happy, you're happy, you pay less in rent and you buy the house. The sooner the better for me personally. Now, when I first started, I was hoping that they would take all the way because I didn't have as many properties and I wanted the cash flow for as long as possible. But, if they end up performing on the deal, I think that's great. I want them to buy the house.
Right.
But yes, there's nothing in my clauses personally that they can or they cannot perform early. Like they're allowed to.
Okay, so what I'm gathering here is the benefit for the seller is that they could sell the property for a higher purchase price in a traditional sale since you're factoring in appreciation for the next several years. You're increasing demand by attracting a wider pool of potential buyers since some may not qualify for traditional financing due to like credit issues or whatnot. Um, Also, you're receiving an upfront non-refundable option fee, which is great. And then I guess lastly, the property will be maintained better because, instead of someone, renting the property, they're actually, planning on purchasing the property. So that those are some great benefits for the seller. What about any disadvantages for the seller? Is there any disadvantages you could think of?
I don't know. I'm kind of biased. I'm kind of biased with the lease option, but I think that a con would be, ultimately you're still a landlord at the end of it. Like we we think that, like, I mean, it does have its perks, right? It has its perks of, minimizing the amount of property management, but we're still property management. We're still renting out the property. And at the end of the day, if you wanted to sell it traditionally, you should have just sold it, right? Because that truly is the most clean way to break off. And, we can negotiate seller finance deals for the tenant, right? We can sell it that way as well. But there's a reason why we want kind of like the low key punishment. It's because we want the tax depreciation and we want the
Right.
rental income, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's the big thing that people forget is we're still property, or we're still managing the property of some way, some form.
Yeah, I think one disadvantage I can just think of off the top of my head here is that you're kind of locking in that future purchase price, right? But what happens if
Yeah.
the home prices just shoot up, they rocket up, and now you're leaving all that equity on the table because you've already committed to this purchase price. So that's one disadvantage I can think of.
Yeah, that's the bet you take. Like if you did a lease option, like 2 years ago, you'd be crying, right? 100K of equity overnight, and you're like, oh gosh, like I have another 2 years with this lease option buyer, right?
Right.
But you know, that's kind of why I like to do the 1 year options with the renewals, because one of my mentors says always be in control,
Right.
right? Like what if like something like that happens, like 100K equity, like, yeah, like, you got to make a business decision, right? Like are we going to exercise this with the seller, or are we going to go actually sell it on the market? um so I guess like that 1 year renewal option contract, obviously you have to be very upfront with the tenant buyer. Like I just want to say, like, it sounds kind of messed up to have that 1 year thing, but you just have to be transparent because I've been in a situation where I had a 3 year term and I was like kind of trapped. I couldn't
Mm.
get out of it, and like the tenant was just doing not a good job, right? And I didn't take a big down payment. I took like a $6,000 down payment. And,
Yeah.
and and they knew that they could lose the money, so they're just like, yeah, you're trapped with me, bro.
No, I think it's good that you actually put that because a lot of people, I don't hear them doing a 1 year lease option or like a preset agreement like you're doing. So you're doing a year where you can reevaluate the terms, but the goal is to do 3 years, is what you're saying. So you kind of have
Correct.
two agreements in there in place.
Yeah, so in my option contract, it literally has like in a paragraph that says like, hey, yes, this expires on this date, but you can extend it, up to two more times if you meet the following requirements.
Oh, okay.
So we break it down Barney style, right? So like, hey, you keep doing this, you keep doing this, you keep doing this, you can renew for another year.
Got it. Okay,
You're
that makes sense.
violating, if you're violating those, hey, you're violating the option contract. So now we can cut you.
Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about the benefits of a lease option for a buyer. What are some of the main benefits for them? What do they gain by doing a lease option?
Well, they get the opportunity to one day own a home, right? Um, you give them a chance to live in a place that's not like super like slumlordy, right? Like I had so many tenants that moved into like one of my houses. They're paying a little bit more in rent per month, but they're living in a nice house. They're living in something livable, and they have that sense of pride of like home ownership. and the price is stable. So kind of the same way that you were talking about with selling a lease option. If that house skyrockets 100 grand, they just bought a house 100 grand cheap, right?
Mm.
They bought on $100,000 discount because they locked it in with me 2 years ago. So and if you're a good like tenant, like lease option landlord, you're gonna get resources from me. You're gonna get great lending officers. You're gonna get a person that's actually going to hand walk you and build your credit. Um, the rent that they pay me, I actually report to the credit bureau.
Oh
So
wow.
I pay the extra $2 a month and I report their rental payments. So I'm really trying to like get these dudes to like qualify. You know what I'm saying? Like we want them to buy that house. So there's so many things that you can do for them to make their experience like a one-stop shop.
Yeah, and I think another great thing is that, you really get time to build roots in your community, right? Because when you go and, let's say you go rent an apartment building or you rent a house in an area and you only have a 1 year lease, 2 year lease, that could be tough, man, if you have kids, right? Because then if they don't renew the lease, or let's say the landlord happens to raise the rent on you and you can't afford it, well, you're forced to move. And now you got to change your kids' school, change their activities, their sports activities, and have to relocate. You can't really build roots in your community. So I think that's also a great option for the buyer.
Yep, super smart, right? They get to be stable for the amount of years that they're staying with you. You know what I mean? So it's great.
It's cool that you actually go out of your way to help them improve their credit, right? Because let's say they can't get approved for a traditional loan, right? Then now you're giving them that option. So like, hey, you got 3 years to live in this property. Let's get your credit straight. So when by the time you go to qualify for this loan, you can actually get approved for it.
Exactly. Exactly. And after they buy the house, their credit score is improved, right? So like financial like overall health has improved. And now you're a homeowner, right? So there's so many different perks for the buyer, especially if you're if you're an investor that really cares about people and actually want them to succeed.
Right. And then not only that, man, they get to test drive the property, right? Because now they get to stay in this property. Let's say like year 2, 3 years down the line, they're like, you know what? I don't really like this house, man. This thing makes noises at night, man. I don't know. There's some voodoo stuff going on here. But and now they can kind of move out, or let's say that they don't like the area, maybe they don't like their neighbors. They have the right to not exercise that option, right? Because they're not forced
Exactly.
to exercise that.
It's your choice.
So, in other words, it binds the seller to sell, but it doesn't bind the buyer to buy.
As long as that tenant is willing to lose their deposit, it's their choice. They can walk. And we've seen that happen too, where they're like, hey, it's just not really in the books for us for our life anymore. We want to move somewhere else. And no harm, no foul.
I mean,
Okay.
Tim, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it almost sounds like a lease option is more beneficial for the buyer than it is for the seller.
Honestly, dude, like if it's done right and the owner's not charging super high rent, dude, like there's so many positives for the buyer, man. Right. But the problem is there's just not many available
Right.
because of maybe it's lack of education or lack of knowledge of a lease option. But it's just like, because everyone thinks of if I'm gonna rent or if I'm gonna do a rent to own, it's gonna be a contract for deed.
Right.
And it's like, no, no, no. Like I think contract for deed is actually more dangerous for everybody than a lease option, right? Like, but we can argue about that all day, but I think it's a little safer to rent the property and then qualify to just buy me out entirely versus
Right.
that trickle down effect, where you're owning more and more of the property. It's just kind of weird.
Absolutely. I mean, so what are some of the disadvantages for the buyer?
Well, they're paying rent and it's not towards any principal. That's
Mm,
the biggest thing. Like they put a down payment down, so their piggy bank money is all locked in this deal, and then they're not paying. So versus a contract for deed, they're paying down equity. They're not paying anything down. It's just rent.
yeah,
So they have to budget as a rental. They got to pay rent, and then they also have to pay their bills and keep building their credit. You know what I mean? So it's like I think that's the biggest problem is they're just renting, you know?
Yeah, that's a good point because, like you said, like you're locking in this future purchase price, but as they're paying that payment for the next 3 to 5 years, it's not going towards the principal. It's only going towards the lease agreement that you structured. So at the end of those terms, they still have to start over and start paying down that property that they originally signed the deal for, right? So
Absolutely.
okay, so talk to us about applying creative finance strategies with the lease option. How are you doing that?
So that's a good question. I like to buy creative, so I like to buy wraps or hybrids, so seller finance subject to, and then my exit strategy is sell on a lease option. The reason why I like to prefer to buy creative, sell on a lease option is because what we talked about earlier. I like to be in control of the deed.
Mm,
So, always be in control, always be in the driver's seat. When you sell on a wrap, so if I buy a wrap and sell a wrap, I technically give the deed to the buyer. And then if they don't pay me, I have to foreclose them because they have the actual paperwork. In a lease option, if done correctly, God forbid they don't pay, we evict the person. And in Kentucky, it's a lot faster and a lot cheaper to evict than foreclose. Right. So that's my big thing. And then the second way is where you can do a lease option to a lease option, right? The lease option sandwich. So, I'm sure a lot of you creative finance guys out there have talked to sellers that don't actually want to sell their property or they feel uncomfortable giving their deed up, right? So they're like, oh, I don't want to sell the property. Okay, well, what if I give you a down payment and pay you rent? So you're a tired landlord, but I'm going to give you passive income every single month. He or she agrees to that, get on their contract, and then you lease option it back out to another tenant buyer.
dude, that's sweet, man. That's what I love about creative finance, man. You could just really get so creative. Like you're only limited it to what your imagination is, you know? And you said that's called a sandwich lease option.
Yep. So imagine lease option from buyer to me, and then me to the tenant buyer that's renting the house.
So you're structuring the terms with the seller, and then you're restructuring your own terms to your future potential buyer.
Yeah, so like let's say average rents in the neighborhood is 800 and the seller wants 5,000 down, $500 a month. Great. I'm going to give him 5,000 and then let's say we find a tenant buyer that gives us 8,000 down and wants to pay us $800 a month. We just made $3,000 in the exchange and then now we're cash flowing 300 bucks a month passive, right? So technically no money out of our pocket and we're making $300-400 a month cash flow.
That's awesome, man. So, all right. So, Tim, so if you're the buyer, like you're purchasing the property, subject to or seller finance, and then you turn around and you sell it on a lease option, is that buyer paying you and then you're paying the mortgage and pocketing whatever's extra? Or is the buyer paying directly to the lender? How does that process work?
So it would kind of be like a traditional, well, you can use it like a servicing company, especially if you're doing like a sub two seller finance deal and you got to pay the seller's like mortgage and stuff. I would use a servicing company. But I guess like the basic logistics of it is so your tenant, like a normal rent, like a normal renter would pay you your monthly rent. You have that money and then now you have to go pay your mortgage, right? So it flows that way. So from tenant to you, and then you to whoever you have to pay to get the deal done. So like, if you got a 30-year mortgage at a bank, you got to pay that mortgage, right? If you got
Right.
to pay that seller finance note, you got to pay that seller somehow. So we like to use the rental income from the tenant to pay whoever we have to pay, just like a traditional rental.
Got it. Makes sense. Okay. And you said the main reason, because a lot of people do argue that, right? They'll be like, hey, Tim, why don't you just do a wrap instead of doing a lease option? So your main purpose for not doing a wrap is because you actually hold the title on the lease option, correct?
Correct. And also, I think it's more complicated to tell people what a wrap is, right? So if I say rent to own, majority of people know what that means. They're going to rent until they own the house. When I say like, I talk to agents all day, right? It's like, hey, want to sell my house on a wrap? And then you're like, they're like, what is that? Right? You're like,
Mhm.
well, it's when you wrap a new mortgage around a previous mortgage, and it's like it's effective, but I think it's a little more difficult to sell and to get rid of.
Yeah, I think you got to do a little more, bit more teaching than just saying, lease to own. It's a lot more
Correct.
simpler term, and a
Super
lot of
easy.
people have heard of it more than a wraparound mortgage.
Absolutely.
Okay, so can you wholesale a lease option to an end buyer?
That I don't know, actually. That would be really interesting if you could, if you can. I mean, I guess in that way though, I would probably just try to convince them to do a seller finance deal if I was gonna wholesale, because that's crazy, right? Like, yeah,
Right.
that'd be nuts. That'd be nuts. If anyone can like kind of shed some light on that, that'd be pretty awesome.
Yeah, because I'm thinking about it, right? Since we're talking about creative finance, structuring a lease option agreement with the seller and then just turning around and wholesaling it off and collecting an assignment fee. Like you structured the terms, right? And now you're
Damn.
collecting that assignment fee. So yeah, man. If anybody knows any, about that or if you can do it, drop a comment down below. I wanna know more about your experience with that. Because it also leads me to another question. Can you flip a lease option? Do a fix and flip and do a lease option.
Yeah, you technically can, right? Because at the end of the day, the landlord, the original seller, just wants to get cashed out, right?
Right.
But I think you have to have that conversation with the seller, like, hey, is there gonna like kind of the same question you asked me, like, do you have a prepayment or pre-execution penalty? If the seller is like, nah, man, if you want to like refinance and pay me off, I'm good with that. Then we can put that in the paperwork and kind of get it done. But I think that kind of gets messy, right? Because I think that kind of starts to like go into like potential novation agreements, potential, you know what I mean? Now we're like, I think we're overcomplicating the sauce, if that makes sense, because so many moving pieces. But I think that, if you have a conversation with a seller and you get it down on paper, I don't see a problem with it.
Yeah, and so another cool thing that you were kind of talking about a third party servicing company, right? I saw this podcast interview with Pace and Jerry Norton. I don't know if you saw it. It's part of his master class.
Mm,
And he was talking about if you service the lease option with a third party servicing company, and when the renter goes to get qualified for a new mortgage, it's not considered a new mortgage. Instead, it's a refinance because you're showing the lender that they were making the payments to a third party servicer.
yes.
So have
Yes.
you applied that at all, or is that something you're familiar with?
No, I have not, just because I have the local people in my market. But if you don't have that resource and you're like doing it virtually and all that stuff, yes, absolutely leverage the third party servicing companies, because that actually gives you an advantage in that way. Um, I do everything in my backyard. So like literally I can call like three loan officers that normally do business with me. So like I have that kind of connection locally, but I would definitely leverage a servicing company that does all that stuff for you, because it only helps you.
Yeah, because that's interesting to me. Because now they don't have to actually go apply for a new mortgage because they can already prove, like, hey, I've been paying Tim for the last 5 years, so
Yep.
now it's not really technically a new mortgage loan. It's actually just a refinance. So
Yeah.
interesting stuff
To
there.
my name. Yeah. New rate and to my name.
Right. So what common mistakes do you see beginners make with lease options, and how can they avoid them?
Picking the wrong tenants and not getting enough money down. Like,
Mm,
don't let somebody lease option with like 100, like with $1,000, right? It's something that you need to have enough of a down payment for them to think twice when if they're gonna do something bad. Like, oh, if I don't pay rent, like I don't care if they evict me, right? I'm only gonna lose $1,000. But if they're losing $18,000 or $10,000, like that's a significant amount of money.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a very good point, man. Make sure that you're not bringing in someone that's just paying too little bit of money, right? Because then you're at a higher risk, right? So, Tim, do you mind sharing a story of one of your lease option deals that was a successful turnout?
Yeah, so I've only been in the game for 15 months, so I actually don't have anyone that's actually performed recently, right? Because a lot of them are like recently put in there in the last year or so. But I can tell you a story of a lady we just moved in a couple weeks ago. So we usually like to have 10% down. She didn't have that, right? She had a bad credit score, and I said, hey, listen, we just want, like, we can work something out. Let's do 3.5% down on move-in day, and then I'll seller finance, or let you pay that non-refundable payment over a course of 2-3 years. So yes, I'm taking a risk, but I met her family, I met her, and she's a incredible lady that's just been through a lot of health issues, and you hear their story and you understand like why they're in that predicament. And she's like, I had a lot of medical bills and stuff like that, and I kind of fell behind. And I said, if you have 3.5% down, we'll move you in. So
Mm.
she did. But so 3.5% down moves her in, and then we structured a payment plan for her to get the remainder balance of that non-refundable down payment. Now, guys, be sure to remember this. Do not mix your checks with each other.
Mm.
Do not have your rent check in the same check as your non-refundable money. Everything must be kept separate, right? I've seen this before in my actual city. This person was taking non-refundable payments within the rent, and it was combined. And then when they had a bad issue, she was trying to evict the person. The judge actually said, this person has equitable interest in the property. You're going to have to execute a foreclosure.
Wow.
Keep everything separate. It's good practice for your books. It's good practice for everything. Rent is rent. Non-refundable is non-refundable.
Yeah, that's a very good point you brought up, because I did see a lot of people word it when they say a down payment, when it's not actually a down payment, it's a lease option fee, which is non-refundable. So you got to make sure that your verbiage in your contracts state that, because if they put in a down payment, technically it's, hey, I put a down payment on this house, I have an equitable interest in this property.
Yes. Non-refundable option fee. Like, do not say down payment. Crazy.
Yeah. That's good stuff. That's good stuff, man. So awesome. Well, Tim, I think we pretty much covered all the basics of how lease options work for not only the sellers, but for the buyers as well. Is there anything you can think of that we might have missed and didn't cover here today that you think we should cover?
I think we covered most stuff. I think there's potential good leads out there, so maybe we can talk about that real quick. I love rental. If you look on like rental markets, and any house has been not rented for 30 days or longer, those are great potential lease option sellers, because they're trying to rent it out, the property, to begin with. They just unfortunately can't rent it out. So if you kind of
Mm.
pitch something like, hey, what if we sign like it's kind of like arbitraging, right?
Right, right.
What if I pay you monthly, and then in a couple of years I buy your property at a higher purchase price. That's how I would sell it. It's like, if you're interested in potentially selling, what if I rent this house from you for 3 something years, whatever, and then I buy it at a higher purchase price,
Dude,
and then
that's
you
interesting.
negotiate it from there.
I'm glad you brought that up, man. So you're looking up properties that they're having trouble renting out for the last 30 days, is what you're saying. So what sites are you looking at? Are you looking on Zillow, or are you looking PropStream?
Zillow, Facebook Marketplace, bro. Like, you'd be surprised how much crazy stuff's on Facebook Market. Like, those people that are, you know, mom and pop owners, right? That just list on Craigslist and stuff. They're the perfect people to talk to.
Dude, that's awesome. Cool stuff, man. Anything else you could think of? I want to make sure we cover everything, right? Because I know there's so much to lease options. We could probably even do a part two of this, but I just
Oh
wanted
man.
the main focus of this was to cover the basics of it. And then we can get to more deeper strategies on the next episode if we decide to go that route. But anything else you can think of right now that for the basic standpoint that we should have covered?
I think we're good on the basics. I think that it is a good tool to have in your tool bag, and it gives you flexibility, right? Like, it gives you flexibility, and I guess like the biggest takeaway is you have the potential to give someone the opportunity to buy a house. and it's a great feeling to have. And also, you make some money as well, so you're getting paid for the service you provide. So I think it's a win-win across the board. It's super awesome. And if you do it right, you're protected legally as well. So
Awesome. Well, Tim, it's been an honor to have you on the show, brother. You brought a ton of value here today, not only to my viewers, but myself as well. You're absolutely crushing it in this space right now. I see you on the rise, jumping on different platforms and creating a ton of momentum. People in the real estate space are getting to know exactly who Tim Yu is and the value you bring to the table. I know you've been talking about it lately, but I truly do hope you start that podcast soon, bro. I can't wait to see what you do with your channel, and you can count me in as a subscriber for sure.
hey, I love it, brother. Thank you so much for having me. Everyone, hit the subscribe button on Big Joseph's podcast. I reached out because the show's awesome, man. So tons of value, and thank you so much for inviting me on, man.
Hey, brother, I appreciate that. Tim, where can people get a hold of you?
Instagram's the best way. It's so the @ it's Tim Yu. So ITS and then my name. Easiest way to reach me. Please shoot me a DM. I love to help you guys. I help a lot of wholesalers renegotiate contracts. So feel free to hit me up.
There you go. Hold Tim to that, man. Send him a DM, and I'm sure he'll be able to answer any questions that you guys might have. So again, appreciate you, bro. Now, if you guys are finding value from this episode, don't forget to show me a little love. Subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon so you don't miss any future episodes. Don't forget to like this and drop a comment down below what you learned today about lease options. Appreciate all the continued support, and guys, stay tuned. I got a new real estate topic that I'm dropping every 2 weeks. Best believe I'm gonna keep bringing you that fire. Thank you, Tim.
See you guys. Appreciate it.